Hello, welcome to Critical Line Item. My name's Tom Ravlick, and thank you for joining me for this particular podcast. Now, but from time to time, we talk to people that do stuff that is kind of more mainstream and in your face, whether it be the politicians and accountants and whatever have you. But we're going to be looking at a bit of a niche area today, a space called maritime law. Actually, quite a bit of fun when you think about it. It sounds dry, but it's not that. It's not going to be dry when you hear our guest today. Alison Cusack has been doing maritime law for some time. She's got her own firm. And not only that, uh, she's got a few stories to tell about how, the sort of challenges you have when you're running a practice in dealing with that particular space. Alison, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I always
Uh,
love talking about shipping law.
and, Wonderful. Before we dive into the niche space you play in, um, how would you describe your career as an elevator pitch to somebody who'd never met you before?
I would probably say I spent 6 years working as an in-house lawyer for an international carrier and got my feet wet on the international billionaire company scene, and then decided to switch sides for the little guys and look after the cargo interests, which I've been doing for just under 5 years now. And in between all of that, I do a lot of work in the gender advocacy space and also for seafarer welfare.
Okay, so how did you get? Yeah, how do you get into the maritime law space?
That requires me to confess my intense nerdery at law school. So when I was doing my law degree at Vic Uni, as most other law students can attest, you do eat every extracurricular possible. So for me, that was mooting, which is fake law court. You get a problem, you get up, you have a plaintiff or respondent, and you argue it out like you're in real court. And I had done all the competitions, and another one came up, and it was called IMLAM, the International Maritime Arbitration Law Moot. And the professor said, if you want to learn it yourself over the summer holidays, you can be in the team. And I said, absolutely. Why wouldn't I? Another chance to get on my feet. And so over the course of a summer, I learned all about maritime for the purposes of the problem. And we didn't make the finals, which still irks me to this day. So once I found out about maritime law, because no undergraduate course in Victoria actually teaches maritime law, which I hope someone will change because I'm available to teach. And as soon as I came across, nothing like a quick pitch. As soon as I came across it, I was hooked. I was hooked immediately because I'd actually done half of an electrical engineering degree, which is all in the nano, 10 to the -9, very invisible to the naked eye. And then you go into law and you talk about contracts and you talk about IP and you talk about currency and all these kind of ethereal concepts that they're not tangible, right? Like, yes, you can touch money, but the concept behind money is confidence, right? So then you get to shipping and you're like, this very, very big ship, not a boat, a ship, crashes into this wharf and all of these containers fall off and we can see the damage. And I was like, this is great. You can see it, you can touch it, you get photos. This is just really cool. You know what I mean? It's the biggest thing possible. And I'd come from the smallest thing possible. And I was like, yes, I wanna work I want to be dwarfed by my subject matter. So once I found out about maritime law, I was hooked. There was no swaying me from that path, even though some practitioners kindly advised me of how niche a field it was. I was determined.
How long's the firm been running?
Next month is 5 years, which is pretty incredible considering I started it from complete scratch. No clients, not much of a sort of visible client profile because I hadn't been in a law firm, um, and just got out there and networked and went through a couple of successive lockdowns, and here I am.
that it's been 5 years, and there's 5 years of stories to tell, and we've only got about 20 odd minutes. But when you're, yeah, when you explain what you do to people, I try to explaining to people what I did at professional accounting bodies, because yeah, at parties or barbecues, people will ask you, and they go, "What are you doing that for? Didn't you get a degree in journalism?" That's always a fun conversation. How do you explain the domain of maritime law to somebody who knows nothing about it?
Well, most people don't know anything about maritime law, which I'm working very hard to change. At the start, it was a lot of questions about pirates, which was a little bit of fun, depending on how much alcohol had been consumed. They couldn't necessarily tell if you were telling the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Then, for all the local Victorians, it was the containers down Footscray Road and all those Lego boxes stacked on top of it. Oh yeah. To which people still said, no, we bring everything in by airplane, don't we? And I said, I guarantee you the barbecues at Bunnings are not coming in by airplane. It'd be horrendously expensive. And then luckily for me, in the industry in some ways, a very, very large ship called the Ever Given got stuck in the Suez Canal and made worldwide headlines. And we get to say, the ship that got stuck in the Suez? Yeah. The Austin Powers meme. Yes, that's the one. The containers on those ships, anything in a container, that's what I handle. And the other way I'd explain it is anything you see on the shelves when you walk into a store, whether it's Kmart, Woolies, Big W, any of that, most likely it's been imported. That's the kind of stuff that I work with.
When one of the challenges in dealing with this stuff always is looking at the complexity not only of one jurisdiction but of another. I mean, the world's complex enough when you're dealing with legal matters within Australian borders, right?
Yes.
What are some of the hairier areas that do your head in when you're looking at the legal landscape, and there's one thing transposed upon another, like a teenager's pile of clothing in the corner of a bedroom?
Precariously toppled onto the chair. It doesn't
There's
do
that too.
it doesn't do my head in. I just sort of watch the client's head quietly explode when I'm walking them through this, because to me it makes a lot of sense. And so for me it's very well worn, like, yeah, you take 2 steps to the left and then you do a half a spin and then a jump, and kind of like Indiana Jones, weaving his way to the chalice, to go through all those things. But he's got the book, right, to tell him. It's got all the notes to tell him the secret pathway. So for me, it's like, yeah. If it's cargo to from or through the US, the US Carriage of Goods by Sea Act, US COGSA, just automatically applies. That's the power the US has. It's like, boom, we will apply. But then if it's outward bound cargo from Australia, you have Australian COGSA mandatorily apply, but not if it's inward bound. And then you have the jurisdiction clauses in the freight forwarders terms and conditions, and that may apply to the what we call ultimate consignee or ultimate shipper. And then you've got the carrier's contract of carriage, which is their bill of lading, and then they go, well, if it's US to, from, or through, then US courts will apply, but otherwise it's London. But if it's under $30,000, we'll be in the London small claims arbitration, fast track process. But if it's anywhere from, $30,000 to $200,000, no currency specified, mind you, we'll go off to Singapore arbitration. But if it's more than that, we might go off to Paris. And you're going, thanks for the choose your own adventure clauses that we have. And then on top of that, you've got international conventions which mandatorily apply. So you just, start jotting down some notes and see where you went. And then you end up one place and then someone sues you and says, you're in the wrong jurisdiction. Come play over here. And then you have a fight about where you should have your fight. And then everyone's going and going, we want to arbitrate in Singapore. Well, you've got to come sue us in Germany. And where do we fight about where to, and the Australian courts are going, don't look at us. We got no skin in this game. And you're like, but everything happened in Australia. And the Australian legislation says, don't care. Cool story. You provided all the services in Australia, but freedom of contract. Let's go. That's just a standard day.
That's a standard day. Now, if that's a standard day, Alison, what's a really weird one?
I guess it's weird. It depends. Classic lawyer answer. How do you define weird, Tom? Gotcha.
Now, I'll go down the hallway and get my copy of the Macquarie.
So weird for me is when it's more of a logic confuddle. Do you know what I mean? When weird is going, why are they doing this? This doesn't track logically. This doesn't track contractually. This doesn't track from like custom. So there's a lot of things that go on in shipping that you won't find written down, but everyone goes, yeah, of course. That's and the newbies in the industry are going, sorry, what now? And you're like, it's okay, you'll catch up. So for me, if it gets weird, my thing is, okay, who's withholding information? Who is not telling me what? And I always say to my client, tell me everything, tell me now. Because, and my clients know this, I always assume my clients are lying for one of two reasons, or everyone's lying, honestly, for one of two reasons. One, they think that it's correct because they don't understand, or they're parroting something someone else has told them and they're just repeating it verbatim without, interrogating or understanding. So it's rarely a deliberate lie, but they believe it to be the case. And then you look at the documents and go, no. And then you have to do a re-education piece with your clients. But the threshold to entry into the shipping industry in some parts of it is incredibly, scarily low. Like, you don't need qualifications to become a freight forwarder in the sense of government approval or you know what I mean? So it's but yeah, weird for me is when I'm like, why are they saying that? What are they doing? But otherwise, if it's weird fun, it's normally the cargo commodity type. There's been there has been some very interesting commodity types, one-off art pieces. I think my favorite was a diplomatic container. So you know how they have diplomatic pouches that, you go, well, you can't see in that and I'll put whatever I want. It could be jewels, it could be letters, whatever. It was a diplomatic container. And I said, well, I need to know what's in it. And they said, we won't tell you that. And I said, well, from a safety perspective, I actually do need to know that. And they said, no. And I said, can I ask you what's not in it? And they said, maybe. So then I had to rack my brains and think of every single question of what it couldn't be. So by default, I knew it was safe. And that was a weird day to have something that was a diplomatic container. That was very entertaining.
There's something that and then listeners will know from my past discussions with accountants and others on this, but I've spent a bit of time in the accounting world over the years, and one of the things that continually came up in interesting situations when you talk to accountants in practice or accountants in corporate is the phenomenon of the thing you see in front of you being an agreement or a contract, and then needing to ask whether there's anything else that links to it that completely turns the son of a bitch upside down. I suspect you see a little bit of that
Well, it's admirable that you assume we have contracts in the first place. The shipping industry is not big on signing documents or
Oh,
producing documents.
no, not even sort of, thumbprints or stuff like that, or paw prints or
It's
whatever.
we're very big on handshakes, scribbles on the back of a slightly damp napkin from the bar. So there's this concept in
Handshakes. Hold on, before you do that, can I just take something with my phone just in case?
I know the lawyers are such killjoys. We're like, put it in writing, and then you see, and you're like, not that.
Are you confessing to be a killjoy now? Are you?
Just because I don't want my clients to go to jail for cartelling, I'm a bad guy. So I want to save you from $100 million fine. I know, terrible of me. God, I can't do anything fun. So there's a concept in law called bailment. So when you drop your clothes off to the dry cleaner and then you get a ticket and you go back and you pick it up. So the thing is, bailment is really phasing out in the commercial sense. That's a very business to consumer, and bailment's phasing out to the point that I didn't even really teach it when I was teaching it, the business and company law subject that I taught, except for the fact that shipping is accidentally bringing it back, because bailment is a tort where you have goods in your custody, care, or control, but no contractual sort of basis for it. Otherwise, it would be, contractual bailment. Because freight, and I've been educating the freight forwarders on this and the industry, because the freight forwarders are like, we'll just, get business done. We'll worry about the paperwork later. We'll get the business done now. Because there's no contracts, bailment is the de facto legal mechanism when you have a claim. And so all of a sudden, running these cases for bailment when it should be contracts, and I'm thinking, how is shipping single-handedly bringing back a near dormant legal concept that was really better off in the 1900s? And I'm thinking, this is classic shipping. We like to be sort of almost outside not the law, but the law norms. Because a lot of concepts are like, yeah, that's construction of contract, but that doesn't really apply to us. So anyways, we just power, again, the customs.
Now, when some people think about shipping, they think about, things like piracy. They've probably seen one or two of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies and whatever have you.
Yes.
To what extent do you see the impact of that kind of activity through your practice? Does a lot of that come through?
In terms of piracy, for me, no. The only so if a group of pirates were to seize control of a vessel, it's normally typical regions is sort of Somalia, Horn of Africa, is your sort of typical regions that the owners of vessels will say, we don't want you to transit through these areas or hot zones unless you've got extra piracy countermeasures and premiums that of course go with that, because everything has a price tag attached. The only time I would get involved is if it impacted on the cargo. And so if a pirate group had seized control of a vessel and say negotiated a ransom, and they do negotiate, it's quite wild. They don't just say, give me $100 million or else. They're like, I want $100 billion. And the insurance clubs, the P&I clubs go, all right, we'll get the negotiator on the phone. Okay, how about 20 million? I'm like, how about, and they just negotiate it down like it's a commercial contract. And then they pay it out. But in that case, this very, very ancient concept, which I nerdily absolutely adore, called general average, back from the 1600s, kicks in. And general average, its most simplest, is if we had to expend a heap of money, known as extraordinary expenditure, successfully complete our maritime voyage or our maritime adventure, everyone who had an interest in that sailing successfully completing has to tip in. This means it's uncapped. It's one of the few concepts I've come across where you have uncapped liability. So if there's, let's keep the math simple. We've got, $10 million ransom and 10 containers, and we just ignore every other interest. You do the maths on that. That's your container. That's your contribution. Please, we're going to hold your container until you kick it in. And that's why I'm such a big fan of insurance, because there's so many classic marine adventure things that can impact on you that you have to pay for, that the general freight forwarder or new entrant is like, I've never heard of that. I've never dealt with that. I don't want them to learn by the school of hard knocks, because that learn might come at the price of bankruptcy, given the figures involved. So piracy really, for me, that's only when it kicks in because it's really welfare of seafarers, and it's between the owner, the charterer, the P&I club, who's underwriting what, who's paying the bill, and how are you recovering that. Piracy is, it's not a bigger issue as people may think, in terms of what's causing delays, what's causing impact on, from a cargo perspective. It's people think theft is a huge problem. Everyone's like, oh, there's theft down at the wharf. Theft's not the reason things cost more. There's such minor amounts of theft from what people perceive it to be. It's like 1% last time I looked at it. Do you know what I mean? It's not this huge, scandalous, rot going on that 1 out of every 10 containers is getting a little slice taken off it.
Now, working in this space, in any space, whether it be law, accounting, or whatever have you, working in any niche space can be quite exhausting. What do you do to sort of switch off? Let's just start.
Switching off. Sorry, what's that concept? That was a really hard thing when I first started my career, because I worked for an ocean carrier and the ships go 24/7, 365.
Yeah.
And you hear your work phone buzzing a bunch, and you're like, oh no, that's a lot of emails, which means something's gone horribly wrong. And so, for the first part of my career, I didn't want to switch off, because it was so exciting, because I just wanted to learn. Now you're gonna love it. So I switch off by watching really trashy like cop shows. And the funny part about that is they end up chasing someone into the docks, into a container yard. And I'm there watching this scene going, do you not understand the insurance implications of what's happening right now? You just can't walk onto a wharf. You need a MSIG card, and then my brain kicks back in.
Now you reminded me of a movie going experience I completely wrecked for myself. Back in the 90s, when the original Jurassic Park movie came out, I walked in and I had my philosophy type hat on, thinking, oh my goodness, this is what sort of mucking around with genetics ends up doing. This is the biggest argument against it. I sort of walked out of watching the original Jurassic Park movie, and I had to watch it a second time at some point to actually sit down and actually enjoy it more. Just switch your brain off and enjoy, have fun.
I ruined the A-Team for myself, the reboot of the A-Team, because at the end, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't gotten around to it, they're at the end, they're at the port, and they have these huge stacks of containers, and they're moving them around, and I'm thinking, in what universe, what access to documents do you have? Because I want access to that technology, because you seem to know more what's in these containers than the actual people running them do. Secondly, these containers are falling off, and I'm thinking, who lashed that? What kind of crappy lashing job have you done that the containers are not falling as a complete stack? And then finally, I'm looking at it going, I started looking at the final end scene, not for like, oh, and they bested the corrupt CIA or whatever. I was like, oh my God, where would I even begin for like disaster recovery on this port with these containers, skewed everywhere and all this law enforcement? And all I was thinking is, oh, can you imagine the delays and the insurance claims? It's gonna be a goddamn nightmare. Because I couldn't I couldn't watch it without thinking about if I was the lawyer involved in that, how painful it would be. And I was like, oh no, I've gone too far. But
Well, I for my sins, I opened my mouth a bit too wide once when I was in one of the two professional bodies I worked at, and I suggested the guys have fun with the tax problem, and that is, uh, what would the tax profile be for, Tony Stark and Bruce Wayne?
yeah, but that sounds like fun to like work out what's through the company and what's
They,
tax.
they, 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 they looked at me and they sort of that conversation lasted for 5 minutes, and they decided to go up and do the serious stuff like, here we are, but the latest superannuation update is, and I thought it'd be really fascinating to sort of muck around and have a bit of a think about
Well,
that.
there was a case of sheep rustling recently in Victoria, and I was speaking to a colleague who had also worked in the primary industry space because, as a shipping and transport lawyer, you do work with people who cart stock horses and brumbies and sheep, and from auction yards. And I was speaking to them about how you would successfully rustle, pull off a sheep rustling endeavor. We worked through all the mechanics about how many years you would have to plan this and all of the spin-offs, and then it turned into sort of like, how could you sell the sheep but also at the same time, funnel all this money through the mafia. We're like, okay, we need to stop now, we need to stop, we're starting to plan a 3-year heist of 200 head of sheep. But this is the thing, the more you sort of see things and work through them, it really helps when you do these desktop exercises every now and again. It really just keeps your brain sharp for what are they doing and why are they doing it and how are they doing it. And you sort of go, you start sort of going, no, I see how this came about. And where do I need to intervene? Because the shipping industry is very much the Wild West, and she'll be right, give it a crack. How hard can it be? And that's where you get the weird, what were you thinking? How did it get this far? Why did no one stop you? Why were there no controls to stop you? And then that's when you get these mind-boggling. Something comes across your desk and you're like, oh my God, I don't know if I want to know that this exists. And that's why I'm a big believer in never trust large companies are doing the right thing just because they're large. I've seen how the Swiss cheese holes line up and something sails right through to disaster.
Well, there we are. I've been talking to Alison Cusack from Cusack and Co. That's her firm, about a whole range of things, principally maritime law. It's one of the few people who actually understands the stuff. Alison, if people wanted to read up on your firm, where do they go?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, Alison Cusack, or my website, which is cusackandco.com.au. I'm also on Twitter, TikTok. Just type in the shipping lawyer and you'll find me pretty soon.
No worries. Thanks for joining me for this particular episode of the podcast. It's been wonderful to chat.
Thanks for having me.